Evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this evening's program. Um, my name is Stacy, and I handle adult education here at NCMOH. So whenever you sign up for one of these History and Highballs programs, you and I get to virtually spend the evening together listening to some incredible stories about North Carolina places and people and what makes our state so special. There will be a Q&A opportunity at the end of tonight's program. We just ask that you please type any questions that you have for our guest speaker into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. Once the speaker has finished their talk, our adult programs intern will ask them as many of your questions as time allows. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome our speaker for tonight, Sally Bloom. Sally is a director for Longleaf Film Festival and believes in the power of independent film to make connections, generate reflection, entertain, and form community. Inspired by filmmakers and film fans, she looks forward to Longleaf each year as work on the event goes on year round. Sally finds many connections between her other work for our home base, the Museum of History, and Longleaf because everything has history. That other work includes writing and producing videos for the museum's website and its YouTube channel, reaching students through live streaming classes, and making history cool. Sally is a native North Carolinian and attended that light blue school. Sally, I'm going to turn things over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Stacy, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with me. I'm excited to share with you some things we have worked on in the past that we're going to continue to work on now. And let's get started. I can do this. Here we go. Whoops, that's not what we want from the beginning. Okay. All right. So again, I'm Sally Bloom, and I want to jump right into things. The name of this program tonight is Still Starring North Carolina, so we're going to get into that and why I'm also talking about something called Longleaf. So let's go. What I want to do to begin with is share some film clips with you. Made in North Carolina film clips and film shows. There's two sets of clips. There's a little bit of overlap between them. I hope these bring back some memories for you or introduce you to some new content if you haven't seen it before. Here we go.
A drop in the hammer. Absolutely, ma'am. I'd love to sign your baby.
Jim, I'm gonna come at you like a spider monkey.
You're right, devil.
I'm touching you.
We need a live rooster to take the curse off Jose's glove, and nobody seems to know what to get Millie or Jimmy for their wedding present. Is that about right? That's right. We're dealing with a lot of
Nicely done. Like a spider monkey.
Let's keep rolling.
An American prisoner of war has been turned.
You said this in English.
Yes, working for Abu Museum.
Happy Hunger Games! And may the odds be ever in your favor.
This is Kenny Bell, professional baseball player. So let's get the it on.
Well, the teacher asked me what was the capital of North Carolina. I said Washington, D.C.
Bingo.
Okay, I don't know about you, I'm exhausted just from watching those. I love time travel through film clips, not just to where the films might take us, but to when they were made and how they were made. And so those got some of the blast to the past out of our system there. And now I'm just want to say again, I'm really looking forward to sharing some information with you this evening, some film history, and maybe a little bit about film festivals that you didn't know before. So, a film festival and a history museum. Now, not everyone thinks that that's a natural connection, but the link between those two was very, very clear to the team of people here at the museum who is creating an exhibit called Starring North Carolina. Now, in ancient history, by that I mean back in 2010, 2012, a group of us here at the museum, an exhibit team was working on an exhibit called Starring North Carolina. And it took us several years. It explored the state's more than 100-year history of filmmaking. It was planned, researched, built, created in-house by people here at the museum. And I was an educator on the team, which meant I had a lot to do with thinking about and being creative about the interactives, the hands-on things in the exhibit, as well as programming that went along with the exhibit. And my partner in crime, my partner in all that work was Jerry Taylor, the museum's multimedia producer. And these are some pics of us in our everyday work clothes, some of the people on the exhibit team. But of that, it's pictures of us at the opening gala for Starring North Carolina when it opened in 2014. So what was Starring North Carolina? Well, it was really big for the museum. It was an 8,000 square foot exhibit with over 600 artifacts, plus hundreds of images, dozens of hands-on interactives, and stories, so many stories. Stories about films, film history, the people behind the stories, behind the locations, all put together in a really cool exhibit. Now, the exhibit curators, Katie Edwards and Raylana Poteet, now they were the experts on film history, but I did do a lot of research on films made within the state and where they were. I was trying to see when films had been made and where they had been made. And one of the very first that we all discovered, I don't think it is the first, but one of the very first was The Heart of Esmeralda, filmed in 1912 in Bat Cave, which is in Henderson, North Carolina. It was a Vitagraph Corporation film directed by William Reynolds, starring Edith Story and Helen Gardner. Now, from that start, with my research, I found over 3,000 films, documentaries, TV series made in North Carolina, not talking about sporting events or one-off events or commercials, and filmed in all 100 counties of the state. Since that time, now we think that more than 8,000 films have been made in North Carolina, and it is estimated that filmmakers spent about $258 million on productions in North Carolina in 2022. So that's quite a change in the last 10 years. So why North Carolina? Why filmmaking in North Carolina? Well, the first reason, we're going to talk about three main reasons, and I'm going to add a fourth. So the exhibit focused on three main reasons about why North Carolina. And the first one is just what your real estate agent will tell you: location, location, location. Here in North Carolina, as you all know, geography really makes great settings for films, for all kinds of storytelling. Since the earliest days of silent films, our landscapes entice filmmakers, from Manteo through our cities, to the mountains, Murphy. Our backdrops here provide really a great jumping off place for filmmakers to tell stories. So that was one reason. The second reason, economics. You can see on the screen there a really old looking document. That is actually a Movie Maker magazine from the early 1900s, and in there is an article from businessmen in North Carolina saying, hey, in the early 1900s, we want to bring filmmaking to North Carolina. They were aware of its economic possibilities, of its ability to bring jobs to North Carolina, and so it started very early, the idea of bringing work here. In the 1980s, movie production companies ventured into North Carolina to save money as a work-to-right state and because of lower cost of producing things here. And then eventually the state of North Carolina offered film incentives to filmmakers, originally through taxes and now through a grant program. All of that had an effect on the film industry, which has helped it grow and develop here. Now lastly, the third reason about North Carolina being a great place to make movies is talent. These are all images from behind the scenes from Last of the Mohicans, one of my favorite films that was made here in North Carolina. That's why they look a little grainy and a little old, but there are literally thousands of people, well-trained people in North Carolina, behind the camera, in front of the camera. And this talent pool really makes North Carolina a place that draws film production. Now, we talked about people. When I was talking about this exhibit and the stories we were telling way back in the day in 2014, here's some people. I want to see how many you can recognize. I'm going to give you a second to look at that, and I'm going to tell you who they are. All right, starting on the top row, of course, our homegrown star, Ava Gardner, Sandy Bullock, Andy Griffith, Evan Rachel Wood, Pam Grier, Emily Proctor, Zach Galifianakis, Michael C. Hall, Murray Hamilton, Earl Hyman, Julianne Moore, Jim Rash, Oscar winner, Elizabeth McRae. Yes, she was Goomer's girlfriend and Festus's girlfriend. Ken Jeong, Peyton Reed, John Schultz, and Hughes Winborn, who is also an Oscar winner. Probably others. Now, those are people I talked about then. Of course, there are so many other incredibly talented people that have arisen out of North Carolina. And there were many more then too, but here's some new ones to talk about. Of course, the first one that came to mind when I was putting this together are the Duffer Brothers from Durham and Stranger Things. Ariana DeBose from Wake Forest, just north of Raleigh, Oscar winner. And then we have, everybody recognize him from Atlanta, Brian Tyree Henry from Fayetteville. He also was nominated for an Oscar in 2023 for Causeway. Michael Abbott Jr. went to School of the Arts, and he was just in Killers of the Flower Moon. And then Renee Rapp, theater star, movie star, playing the same role, really rare, Regina George from Mean Girls, just to name a few more contemporary North Carolinians you might be familiar with when I talk about talent. Now, those three reasons, geography, economics, talent, I want to add a fourth that's really developed over time and is a huge factor in creating an environment here that's conducive to filmmaking in North Carolina, and that's education. We have high schools, performing arts high schools, community college programs, university programs that are excellent in training behind the camera, in front of the camera, and providing opportunities for people trained in these programs to travel throughout the country and around the world to gain more experience and to become really leaders in their field. So, early film history. How did it all happen here in North Carolina? Now, from the very beginning of filmmaking in the state, film was used for all the same reasons it's used today, right? To entertain, to educate, to train, propaganda, promotion, all those things were going on from the very earliest days. And it's interesting to note that in the very early filmmaking in the state, filmmaking was being done by a number of people, although like today, in the end, it ended up at the time being mostly white men who were making films in North Carolina. Let's meet somebody who's not from North Carolina but spent a lot of time here making films in these early days. And that's Ned Finley. He left vaudeville in 1912 to join the American Videograph Company, and he participated in over 60 films. As a publicity stunt, he disappeared, just disappeared from the face of the earth, supposedly, and then was found in Hendersonville in 1915 after a search where he was making westerns, like at Batcave. He had his own company, Blue Ridge Productions. So early on, the state of North Carolina recognized the educational value of film, something near and dear to my heart, and they planned a series of films to help teach and share the state's history. Now, The Lost Colony, which was filmed in 1921, was the first in that proposed series. Now, listen to this. I have to actually read this. The original title of this film: The Earliest English Expeditions and Attempted Settlements in the Territory of what is now the United States, 1584 to 1591. It was a 5-reel, 50-minute silent film. It premiered in November 1921 to then Governor Cameron Morrison and other state officials. There were 4 copies of this film made. It traveled throughout the state, and in areas where they didn't have electricity to run the projector, they would use a Model T Ford and hook it up to that to create the power to run the projector. Pretty cool. Now, 2 women were the master makers behind this film, Lost Colony: Mabel Evan Jones and Elizabeth Grimble. So Mabel Evan Jones was a native North Carolinian from Manteo. She went to Greensboro Women's College. She was a high school teacher and then a district superintendent. She wrote the script for Lost Colony and starred in it as Eleanor Dare, Virginia Dare's mother. Many people in that area of the state, out on the Outer Banks, including in Elizabeth City and Edenton and Roanoke Island, the residents there, they got together and made props and backdrops and sewed costumes. They starred in the film. They were background in the film. They took on all the roles, including the indigenous people roles. They did not get indigenous people to fill those roles at that time. It was considered a success. And many of the costumes and props from the movie were used in pageants and storytelling over the years. And eventually the group of people from this film kind of migrated into another group, and that's a whole different story, but it's a really cool background story to the development of the Lost Colony, the outdoor pageant that you can still go see now, that was written by Paul Green. So that all was tied together. Another North Carolina early filmmaker was Mr. W.S. Scales. He was one of the earliest African-American producers, and his studio, North State Film Corporation, was possibly the first film company in North Carolina run by a North Carolinian. He was from Rockingham County, and he was a very successful businessman and a theater owner in Winston-Salem. In the 1920s, he began producing race films, meaning films with all-black cast that targeted black audiences. And these included A Giant of His Race, His Great Chance, and The Devil's Match, all in the early 1920s with a black director, Ben Strasser. He had a theater. You can see on the photo there, There's been some damage to the photo, but that is an image of his theater in Winston-Salem on Lafayette, the Lafayette Theater. I want to say it's on 4th Street, but don't quote me on that. It was on 4th Street. This is the premiere of A Giant of His Race in August 1921. You can see the huge crowds there gathered for that premiere. That's amazing. Another type of films, early films made in North Carolina and in other places too, of course, was a genre called Our Town. So filmmakers like Don Newland, H. Lee Waters, and John Warner would create a stir by going into a small community and making a film, which they would later then show back to the people of the community. Newland's films were really fun and they were fictional comedies, while Waters would just document everyday life. He would set up a camera and film people on Main Street, in the drugstore, doing different activities. Then that night they would come back and watch it, pay a nickel for it, and that's how he would make money to produce and to create other work for himself. And then there was also John Warner, who made a large splashy film called Pitch a Boogie Woogie. All of these filmmakers screened their completed films in the local theaters, like I said. They would make citizens the star for the day. Now, as the film industry grew, filmmaking really slowed down in North Carolina. And as a matter of fact, of course, Hollywood beat out New York City to become America's movie-making headquarters. Even the beautiful scenery here did not really entice filmmaking without the major production studios that was needed to produce films as the filmmaking technology increased over time. Still, there were a few films made in this time period between the 30s and even the early 80s. And you see here on the screen some posters from Davy Crockett, 1955, The Swan, 1956, Speedway, 1968, and Brainstorm, 1983. Whole bunch of cool stories about Brainstorm, all filmed in North Carolina. That romantic comedy, The Swan, starring Grace Kelly. In that film, she's portraying a woman who marries royalty. She is Princess Alexandra. And then a week before the release of the film, she married actual royalty, of course, Prince Rainier of Monaco. So, how did North Carolina get into the big leagues of filmmaking? One gentleman really showed us the way, Mr. Earl Owensby. He showed us it could be done. Now, he was raised outside of Shelby, North Carolina. He worked in a local theater. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II. He ran his own business. And he just wanted to get into filmmaking. And so he didn't go out west. He didn't go to New York. He created his own. He built a studio in 1973 and started Earl Owensby Studios. With zero experience, he released his first film, Challenge, in 1974. He went on to produce a number of films, including Dark Sunday, Wolfman, Living Legend, The King of Rock and Roll, that was 1980, and Dogs of Hell, also known as Rottweiler, in 1982. He was actually very successful. He made a lot of money by selling, back in the day, those tapes, Betamax, VHS tapes, over to Europe. He was really popular in Europe and in other places too, and so he just made his own movies. That studio you see there, it had an airstrip. It was just massive. I was fortunate enough to get to visit it and meet Mr. Owensby. He's quite a character. His film studio consisted of 67 acres with 8 sound stages, and he had access to a 100,000 gallon tank. He worked alongside director James Cameron, I'm sure all of you have heard of him, during shooting for The Abyss in 1989. Because Mr. Owensby just happened to own an abandoned, unfinished nuclear power plant that had this big water tank that was needed for filming of The Abyss. He experimented in 3D. He was just cutting edge, way ahead of everybody, but he showed that really cool films could be made here in North Carolina. Now, we were very fortunate in starring North Carolina. Mr. Owensby loaned us some artifacts, in which he allowed us to add to our collection. You can see there one of the dogs from Rottweiler and his costume from Living Legend. Really quite an incredible North Carolina story. So around that time in the late 1970s, Governor James B. Hunt Jr. learned that Hollywood producers were looking for new places to film. Maybe it was less expensive, different backgrounds. Where were their production studios? And so in response to that, he created the North Carolina Film Commission to check out and see, hey, are there any economic advantages to us trying to bring the film industry here? He appointed Bill Arnold as commissioner, and together with North Carolina's General Assembly, they passed the state's first film tax incentive, a 15% tax credit. It's very successful. Since 1980, the Film Office has worked to bring filmmakers to the state. And today, Guy Gester is the film commissioner, and there are regional commissions as well. So, something else that was happening in the early 1980s, Italian filmmaker Dino De Laurentiis was looking for a place to film his next film based on a novel by Stephen King. He was scouting for locations to film Firestarter, and his colleague, Frank Capra Jr., yes, the son of Mr. Capra, saw this magazine, Southern Accents, and it had an image of it of Orton Plantation, which is about 15 miles south of Wilmington. And they got in contact with the Sprunt family, who owned the farm then, about using the property. And so they did. They ended up filming there. And while Mr. De Laurentiis was in that area, he was looking around for places either in South Carolina, North Carolina, and was convinced to build a film studio in Wilmington. And Mr. Capra became the head of that studio. So Mr. De Laurentiis opened his first American studio, a $15 million, 32-acre complex in Wilmington, partly again because he preferred the state's lower production costs and the state's right-to-work laws. This was the North Carolina Film Corporation. Cat's Eye, 1984, was the first movie filmed there. He brought in professional crew members from overseas who moved into the area, who trained people in the area to become crew and talent, and it created quite a synergy in the Wilmington area. That community was really indispensable to the burgeoning area of filmmaking in the state, but specifically in Wilmington. In fact, the area now often is referred to as Wilmywood. Eventually, his studio became EUE Screen Gems Studio, and recently that studio was purchased by Cinespace, or Cinespace. With a crew base and a major studio in Wilmington, North Carolina really began to take off, putting out movies through the 80s into the 90s. The first Wilmington area films included Firestarter with Drew Barrymore in 1984, Blue Velvet, 1986, Weekend at Bernie's, 1989, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1990. Soon, productions were being made all across the state. Early examples of this include the original The Color Purple, which is from 1985, and it was shot in Anson and Union counties. Bull Durham, 1988, shot here in the Triangle. Dirty Dancing, 1987, shot in Rutherford County at Lake Lure. And Last of the Mohicans, 1992, shot in the North Carolina mountains. Now, filmmaking started to go overseas as things become less expensive over there, and studios and talent was becoming more available in overseas locations, but that didn't mean that using studios ended here in North Carolina. Filmings of made-for-TV movies and television series began to really grow in the same places where movies had been made. In fact, Dawson's Creek, which was on the air from 1998 to 2003, started a whole new model of making these TV series. Executives would choose a location, get a local crew, and then just cast relative unknowns for a whole TV series. Entire runs of One Tree Hill, Eastbound and Down, parts of Homeland, Revolution, Under the Dome, and Sleepy Hollow all followed that model, and we can see that continuing today. More recently, again, that was then. Let's update that, what's been going on just in the last couple of years. A couple of series filmed here. The Summer I Turned Pretty, of course, Outer Banks. New films coming out this year include Renner, which is an artificial intelligence love story something, as well as Summer Camp. Really looking forward to that one as well. Just look at the women on that film poster. And also I see Eugene Levy is in it as well. Diane Keaton, Kathy Bates, Alfre Woodard. Incredible award-winning people. Just made this film in North Carolina. I look forward to seeing that coming out. The state also has many film production studios, much more than it did in the 1980s. There's Dark Horse now in Wilmington. Clutch is near Charlotte. Trailblazers and Triality are right here in Raleigh, and there are many others as well. Filmmaking is here to stay. Now, you can't talk about filmmaking and not talk about the film experience, right? So part of the exhibit in Starring North Carolina, and part of what we still can all share and enjoy talking about, is the theater going experience. Now, in the early days, we all have an image in our mind, I think, of glamorous starlets, matinee idols. Going to the movies was an event. You dressed up, you got in the car, you drove into town to see whatever was playing. Sometimes you went to see something specific, but a lot of times you just went to see whatever it was. Now, at the time, Hollywood was cranking out films all year long, all the time. Get this statistic. This just, to me, is mind-blowing. From the 1920s through the 1950s, around half of all Americans went to the movies on a weekly basis. Wild. Although when I think about people watching streaming content, we could say now, for some people, it's a daily basis. But this was getting out and going to a theater. The first commercial movie theater in America opened in 1896, and North Carolina had theaters in Charlotte and Wilmington by 1906. By the mid-1920s, very luxurious, opulent movie palaces had come to the state as well. Now, for decades, the Lumina Entertainment Pavilion at Wrightsville Beach near Wilmington was one of the most unusual places to watch movies in North Carolina. Lumina had a 6,000 square foot dance floor, penny arcades, a bowling alley, other things going on, but it began showing movies in 1905 on a large screen erected on the beach. People would sit on bleachers, on beachside porches to watch these films. I think that's just wild. And we think that's so crazy, but now when I think about all the blow-up movie screens we have and showing movies on the side of your house, yeah, they were onto something. We're still doing it. Now, of course, for much of our history, attending the theater meant a segregated experience as we went through the Jim Crow years. And until the mid-1960s, racial segregation was the order of the day. Many theaters only admitted white people. Others required African Americans and American Indians to sit in balconies. They would be accessed through separate entrances and stairways. Most North Carolina towns did have a black theater, but they were usually smaller, less luxurious than the facilities for white moviegoers. However, while these black theaters often showed second-run movies, they also showed first-run movies for those race films I talked about, movies made by blacks for a black audience. Some also served as community gathering places. Now, this image you're looking at is from 1946. It's a picture of the Ambassador Theater, which was on Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh. It shows the main entrance, and if you look very closest under Adler's Slipper Shop, you'll see that there is a separate entrance that blacks were required to use. Now, in certain areas of North Carolina, because of our a special way of handling segregation at the time, there was tri-racial segregation, meaning that in some counties like Robinson County and other areas where we had a large number of American Indians, there were 3 entrances for people: blacks, whites, American Indians. It was really a very challenging time for those kinds of actions, which did end with the end of segregation. In the 1940s and 50s, a new kind of theater that combined our love of cars as well as our love of movies, of course. I'm talking about drive-in theater. Patrons could sit in their cars, around their cars, watch originally first-run movies, then eventually they showed more second-run movies, could get snacks from the concession stands. A lot of these theaters charged by the car, making it a very affordable experience for a whole family to cram in a car or a group of teenagers. At one time, there were more than 200 drive-in theaters in North Carolina. I think there are just a few today. And of course, you know, watching movies changed over time, as we all know, with the invention of on-demand streaming, but before that, Betamax, VHS, and DVDs, Blu-rays, the types of screens, the size of screens, handheld screens. How to watch content is everywhere. I still advocate strongly for going to that theater and having that experience. I think it's magical. So, getting back to Starring North Carolina. And our purpose tonight is to talk about, why am I talking about an exhibit that's gone? Because I think I'm trying to demonstrate that filmmaking is still happening. We could have a whole different exhibit talking about what's gone on in filmmaking from that beginning, but add a lot more to it, and I think that's just amazing. So in that exhibit, we had over 600 artifacts, many, many interactives, stories, so many interviews. It was really cool. And here's a little promo clip that Jerry Taylor made for that exhibit. So a large group of us made the exhibit, members of all the different sections of the museum, everybody else. It was a really wonderful team effort that we did. And as we got to know each other, of course we knew each other, but as we became tight in this exhibit team, we soon learned what each team member's favorite movie was that had been made in North Carolina. And I'm picking on Jerry because he's not here. So I'm going to continue to pick on Jerry. And we all knew that one of his favorite films then and now is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so we were really fortunate to get some of the artifacts and the costumes and pieces and stories about, there's so many incredible stories about that film that was made here. And, you know, unless you're a curator or a member of collections, those are specialty terms here in the museum, you're not supposed to touch the artifacts. However, I may or may not have a picture of Jerry touching an artifact from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Just thought I would share that. Another film that was well loved by everybody was Iron Man. That was just amazing that first Iron Man was made here. And we went around and found all kinds of behind the scenes people and producers, body doubles, Drew Barrymore's body double from when she was a little girl. We interviewed her, and we met some people who had made Iron Man, and they shared this really cool kind of mini documentary about when they made the film in Wilmington. And I'm going to show you a clip now. Have you noticed that I like film clips? It's kind of a thing. Of how they made Iron Man. So they used practical effects, and that is a term of art. That means it's really happening. It's not CGI, it's not artificial intelligence, it's not green screen. They really made this happen. So if you remember the original Iron Man, and I'm sure you all do, if not, please watch it soon. The people are flying, coming out of the plane, they're flying in over the ocean or the Cape Fear River. How did they make all that happen? How did Iron Man do all that? Well, let's take a look at this clip.
You feel that they are really in midair. You can't really achieve that anywhere else.
I'm pretty proud of pulling it off. Not to mention that at the end, we continually swung them back and forth over Cape Fear River.
That was the very last part of the sequence where I think they were about 80 or 90 feet up in the air. We started zipping down, and as they come down over the water, then one after the other, we start releasing them from their zip lines. That was mostly the brainchild of Jim Churchman.
We didn't want to do the CGs. We want real people, real water, real sky. We want, real speed. It just makes it that much more epic.
A 165-ton crane stretched out about 160 feet in the air. We have another 90-ton crane that's stretched out to about 75 feet. And we basically have a 15 zip line rig set up that's motivated by a vehicle. We run them up to 30 miles an hour, get the shots we need, and ultimately drop them in the water. It was a big deal. Came off amazingly flawless.
Ready and action!
Wow, I think that's pretty incredible. I'd like to think I'd like to try that zip line, but maybe not. So, remember way back at the beginning of this presentation about 3 hours ago when I said that one of my roles on the Starring North Carolina exhibit team was to create programming to go with the exhibit. And by that, we usually mean things like, let's have a workshop or a panel discussion, or we'll show a film, some kind of programming like that. Well, Jerry said, you know what, for a program for a film exhibit, we should have a film festival. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So that's how Longleaf Film Festival was born, literally, out of that conversation. We began a film festival with zero experience. That meant we had a lot to do. The work included coming up with a name for our film festival, a logo, a budget, entry categories, an entry platform for submissions. We had to discern what our prizes were going to be, who our film jurors were going to be, how we were going to screen films, and so much more. In May 2015, after over a year of planning, the very first Longleaf Film Festival premiered here at the museum. We screened 41 films and gave out free popcorn. The filmmakers appreciated very much the official selection laurels. You know, those are things you put on film posters, you know, award winner or official selection. Ours are made out of longleaf pine needles. Our graphic artist team here is amazing. So they liked that. They liked our handcrafted award tiles. Every year at Longleaf, we give pottery tiles, which connects that art and craft of pottery making in North Carolina with the art and craft of filmmaking. The event was a success for the filmmakers, the film fans, many of whom were first-time film festival attendees, as were we attending our own festival. And it was successful for the museum as a place that connects, encourages connections between the past, the present, and the future. So, our free-to-attend festival screens independent films. Now, independent films is a term of art I want to take just a moment to go into. Indie films, now, is that a type of film or is that an attitude? Well, the answer is yes, it's both. Independent films are created by filmmakers outside of the studio system, outside of the mainstream system, and if 8,000 films that we can find have been made in North Carolina in the studio system, I would make a guess that 10 to 100 or more times that number of independent films have been made in North Carolina. In fact, with the rise of streaming and demand for content, many independent filmmakers are finding that they are able to get distribution for their films. Now, of course, indie filmmaking has changed in recent years as well. Everything does change over time, that we know. And so now some films are called indie with massive budgets. But they're still outside of a major studio. They might be one studio, that's their one film. But for our purposes, for our film festival, we're talking about those lower budget independent films with professional cast and crew that are working to get films made. These are all posters, by the way, of films in this year's Longleaf Film Festival. Let's take a look at these as well. So, Longleaf screens independent films, right? I've said that. They include narrative and documentary shorts and features, narrative shorts, documentary shorts, narrative features, documentary features, animated films, spoken word films, music videos, web pilots. To encourage younger filmmakers, Longleaf has a category for middle and high school filmmakers. The submission requirement to enter Longleaf reflects our connection to the North Carolina Museum of History. To enter Longleaf, you must have a North Carolina connection. Now, that could be through the people who make them. They're from here, they went to university here, their star is from here. It could be from where they're filmed. If they're filmed in North Carolina, that's a connection. It could be from the subject matter of the film. They're making a documentary about someone or something in North Carolina. So again, that's a North Carolina connection. So all the films in North Carolina have some of those connections. Longleaf also reflects back to the museum by having a special category, History Plus. Those can be for narrative or documentary films, for those that are made that tell stories about the past that are done with some really good research behind them. Now, Longleaf 2015, it was supposed to be one and done. The exhibit was still there, but we had done this big program. We had other programming to do. We had other work to do. But then it wasn't a one and done. Its success prompted a sequel, or 9, and that's where we are today. Now, in subsequent years, Longleaf expanded as well. We grew to 2 days. We added workshops, panels, a wrap party, social media accounts, lots of t-shirts. We also added an outdoor screening, on a giant blow-up screen. We just took that from Lumina, right? Which is called Movies in Moonlight, and that's on opening night of the film festival, and it's a really fun time. Most importantly, of everything we've done at Longleaf is we bought our own popcorn machine. Longleaf remains free to attend. The popcorn is still free. We love that people love that. Now, in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic changed the world, of course, and it required the museum to close temporarily. Now, this is March of 2020. The film festival is always in May. So that was like we were getting ready to rock and roll then. In a matter of weeks, Longleaf Film Festival pivoted from an in-person event to one of the very first virtual festivals. The filmmakers allowed their films to be viewed online for free. Workshops and award presentations were streamed virtually, live stream. Now, it's hard to remember now when we're doing this kind of program, and we've been doing these kinds of programs, that was really new at the time. Longleaf in 2021 remained virtual, and we came back in person in 2022. Now, following the Black Lives Matter movement, we wanted to ensure a more welcoming festival. So Longleaf began offering submission fee waivers to directors who identified as people of color. And beginning in 2022, we also highlighted films made by historically underrepresented filmmakers who chose to be considered for 3 new awards. We have the African American Cultural Celebration Prize, the American Indian Heritage Celebration Prize, and the Latin American Communities Prize. And I'm really, really happy that we've been able to recognize some of the inequities in filmmaking and to appreciate the talent that everybody brings to this community. Now, this year's festival is coming up, I think next week. Yep, it's next week, May 10th and 11th. We're going to screen 71 films. And I'm going to tell you what my favorite is. No, I'm absolutely not going to tell you, because how can I have a favorite? I mean, it's like picking your favorite child. You know that's not going to happen, but my favorite child, you know who you are, I'm just saying. I encourage you to check out our descriptions and the trailers of all these films, which are on our website, longleaffilmfestival.com, along with lots of other information. Now, the more than 600 films screened during Longleaf's history show the collaborative efforts of thousands of individuals. And these films, they entertain, they inspire, they invite reflection and response. They demonstrate insights into challenging times. They relate to perseverance, they have heart, they're creative, they demonstrate resilience. Longleaf has been fortunate to share many impactful stories demonstrating one of our strongest beliefs, and I mean this personally, that the art and craft of filmmaking really does help connect us all. So, a history museum and a film festival. It really is a perfect fit. And I hope I've demonstrated that what I've shared with you tonight, I have a small edit to the Starring North Carolina logo. We're still starring North Carolina in the world of filmmaking, and I am so thrilled to be a part of it and to watch it grow. And I'm always happy to watch film trailers with anybody who is interested in that. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you being with me during that presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Thank you so much. The first question we have is about the film industry and the government support it's getting. Has it been getting more or less government support and within the past few years?
Yeah, I think I probably dropped that from my presentation. So originally it was a tax credit, and then that ended actually in 2014. And instead the General Assembly passed a grant program. And initially it did have a chilling effect on film production in North Carolina. Many filmmakers and a lot of that talent and crew I was talking about, they went to Atlanta, where they did have a tax credit in Georgia, and that film studio world there really, really grew, and it hurt North Carolina at the time. However, the Film Commission and the General Assembly has grown that grant program in the last few years, and we are really coming back. In 2022 was the 6th largest amount of money coming into the state from filmmaking since they've been tracking those numbers. So we're growing back again. So the grant program that it was initiated definitely had a chilling effect, but things are getting better now. The grant program is larger and more production are here. And the North Carolina Film Commission, Guy Gaster, is great. Their website is cool. You can really see all that's just been finished, what's coming up, economics. There's a lot of good information on their website.
Thank you. Another question we have is, how does the film industry in North Carolina compare to other states?
Great question. I cannot say I'm all up on my research on that. I do feel like, I know right after the exhibit opened, what's so funny is that everybody's saying, like, did you open this exhibit because of the tax credit. I'm like, no, we've been working on this exhibit for 3 years. We had no idea the tax credit was going to end right when we opened the exhibit. I do know that Georgia has taken off booming. I think a lot of southern states, Tennessee, really took advantage of opportunities to also offer either grants or tax credits to grow production. California is still huge. But to me, just what I hear on the ground, I think, probably our main competitor right now is Georgia. And overseas, never ever forget overseas film production. Big opportunities. In Eastern Europe was really a booming place and still is to make films.
Thank you. So we have one more question. It's about how are like the local economies impacted by the movie industry, especially in the early 20th century?
In the earliest 20th century. So at that time, I would think it would have been very direct because they would come in and literally pay the community, for the hotel, for help, your wagon, your car, doing this. I'm sorry I don't have the numbers on that. They do exist. Frank Thompson is an incredible film historian of North Carolina. He's writing a series of books about filmmaking in North Carolina. His first one focuses on Asheville region, the Mountain States. So I really encourage you to check out Frank's book. He's been a longleaf juror for years and is really, really knowledgeable. And he actually is from the California film world, but relocated to North Carolina, is enamored of it. So he has lots of numbers and facts. I'm so sorry that I don't have that at my fingertip. But when we talk about the economic impact of filmmaking in the state, usually the film office does provide direct impact dollars, like what are they spending, how are they paying crews, employing people, hiring everything you need to hire to make a film. It's an insane amount of work and costuming, and it just goes on and on, from those cranes to, you had to hire those locally that we saw for Iron Man. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific in that, but it's very real, the economic impact of filmmaking in North Carolina.
Sally, thank you so much for all of your incredible work and sharing this great film history in North Carolina with us and the history of Longleaf Film Festival. This has been really special.
I appreciate that so much. I hope everybody comes out next week and watches lots of movies with me, and check out those trailers. I will be.
Yeah, so as Sally said, this year's Longleaf Film Festival kicks off next Friday, May 10th at 5 p.m., so we hope to see you there. I've dropped the link to the film festival's website in the chat, so definitely grab that before you head out. We hope to see you at our next program, History and Highballs, How Hip-Hop Took Shape in North Carolina and Changed Everything. That's on Thursday, June 6th at 7 p.m. here over Zoom. Until then, we hope all of you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.